What's the greatest challenge facing our media system right now? When you got into a conflict over a political or media issue, think about the qualities, how you were feeling, what was being said. And if you've got that in your mind, maybe reflect on something that you wish you could have done differently. We're all feeling the waves of the craziness right now, whether it's the polarization or even just the sense that how do we know what's real? How do we know what to trust? And all the political violence right now happening and this seeming inability for us to connect across our differences. How do we address that? So these are things that I think about. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think about this because I'm really passionate about healing the divides, and it's just something that I've dedicated my life to so far. It seems like if there's one issue that would really connect us and unite us, it would be health, right? And something clearly is concerning right now when every institution that touches our health, whether it's our pharmaceutical systems, our healthcare systems, the health insurance companies, to our hospitals, that they make more money when we're sick and less when we're healthy. Why is that? What also gets me is we also have the poorest health outcomes among all other developed countries in our world. Why is that? So something I've come to find is that major events have shown us time and time again that we're not getting the truth from the official story. And so we as the people need to be figuring out together, and that's probably why you all are here and why I'm here. But let me just say a little bit about me. So 3 years ago, I became director of WantToKnow.info, a nonprofit information service dedicated to uncovering the hidden forces shaping history and driving global events today, regardless of who's elected into office. So we go beyond partisan politics. We focus on issues, not ideologies, and specifically underreported or censored issues. And we weave together some of the darker truths behind major societal issues with the very ideas, people, and movements that are working to transform those systems. And some of you know this, but our organization was founded by Fred Burks, who was a high-level State Department whistleblower who interpreted for presidents in the U.S., including Bush and Clinton. And he also interpreted for top officials around the globe and got firsthand access to what happens at the highest levels of power, and ended up blowing the whistle on various crimes and wanted to create a platform that could educate the people about what's really going on using verifiable, reliable information. What we call conscious rabbit holing, because some of these issues, you can go down, but we really want to say, what are the type of frames for all of these issues that can actually transform our society and move beyond this darkness? So we have a very sacred mission here. With this line of work, I've done comprehensive investigations into vaccine injuries, corporate cartels fueling the poisoning of our land, food, air, and water, which is what some of what we'll talk about today, mental health, the war on drugs, factory farming, biotech dangers, geoengineering, and wireless radiation. That's also something I'm really passionate about. I've also done a lot of research into transgender medicine for youth. I've been following various health issues for many, many years and really dedicated to giving people reliable, verifiable information they can trust and bring into their communities. So before I worked at WantToKnow.info, I was running a wellness center at a high school in the Bay Area, and I was also doing restorative justice work. So I was working with kids in and out of juvenile hall. I was advocating for children, mentoring youth. I was facilitating, like hundreds of circle conversations, bringing people together that never thought they'd be in the same room together. This work showed me just how rare it is for us to actually talk to each other across our divides, and yet how profound it can be when we actually do. The core things I learned with restorative justice is the first thing is we don't fix problems by pushing people out through blame, shame, or ostracizing, and that we can only transform by calling people in, and that it's not our differences that divide us, it's the judgment about our differences. And so those judgments by itself can lead to binary thinking that puts things into us versus them, right and wrong categories, when usually, especially when it comes to human relationships, things get really complex. And so we live by these unexamined assumptions and labels that drive our interactions with each other, and it doesn't have to be that way. And the last thing is that truth can only be revealed when all voices are heard. different ideas, different lived experiences coming together to be exchanged in good faith. And I started seeing that within the social justice world I was a part of, the COVID pandemic, this whole value of all voices heard was not being honored. When we get out of our singular viewpoint, we're often told we're going to be indulging in dangerous misinformation or hateful ideology. But I found the exact opposite was true when I started reaching beyond the social justice, exclusive race and gender narratives I was told was the truth. When I surrendered my certainty, I found incredible nuance and complexity when I went to vaccine safety conferences, when I went to MAGA rallies, and I started talking to people, even like beyond the political, they're not even on the political spectrum. I just started talking to everyone, trying to get a sense of what's really going on and finding seeds of truth wherever I went. And therefore, new understanding that couldn't have happened if I stood with one side or the other. I witnessed change, healing, and transformation in places I never thought possible. But once I started studying media narratives, which is what we're here to talk about today, I realized something disturbing, which is the system that we live in works precisely against these conditions that make change and healing possible. So I started working with Project Censored, the news that doesn't make the news, educating people about the difference between corporate media and independent media. We talk a lot about how propaganda shows up. This really opened my eyes up to the media narratives that drive everything. A word or a phrase that I really loved that I got from Project Censored is this idea of a truth emergency, when the public's access to vital, accurate information is dramatically impaired because that information is being suppressed, distorted, or ignored by powerful structures and institutions. Never before have we ever had access to so much information. We're literally swimming in it all the time, and yet what is real? What is truth? I would suggest we're being conditioned to live inside two illusions. Much of the societal noise that's dominating our conversation is generated by a media machine designed to discourage viewpoint diversity. This machine presents us with the illusion of consensus. So like, okay, there's one way of looking at it, or like there's maybe two ways, that's either this way or that way, while at the same time promoting the illusion of division by amplifying the extremes on both ends, so you're not really getting that nuance. So together, these illusions create a controlled environment where public opinion can be manufactured. So how do we face all this? Raise your hand if sometimes you just feel so lost, like what do I do with this crazy world? Like, how do we do this? I mean, I think of it all the time too, and here I am talking about it, right? So the one thing that I always orient around is a clear, positive vision for humanity, because a clear, positive vision brings us together and it draws people in. I'm going to actually structure my talk around what social psychologist Jonathan Haidt says is the three forces holding a healthy society together. And so I'm going to talk about media propaganda and censorship, media empowerment tools, and solutions through these three forces. So who's heard of Jonathan Haidt, by the way? A few people. He's one of the main thought leaders in understanding the anxiety and depression and the mental health crisis facing our youth, and largely attributes it to social media. And so he has a thing called free range kids, getting kids to be independent again, getting kids to explore and challenge themselves. So with all that being said, he said there are three forces holding a healthy society together. Social capital, so that's the value, trust, and support we create with each other in the world. Strong institutions, that our institutions are protecting us and that we trust our institutions. And three is shared stories and narratives that bring us all together. So tonight I'm going to explore how each of these pillars have been hijacked by special interests at the highest levels of power, and how we can rebuild them through practical media empowerment tools and real-world health solutions. So let's start off with social capital. So social capital is built wherever people create value together. Like right now, we're building social capital. Everywhere we go, we have that choice. And so trust isn't built on political ideologies or some fixed, set, agreed upon facts. Real trust grows from something deeper. The values and practices that bind us in relationship and make it possible for us to solve our problems together. I want to build on this even more. This is a public health study. It was a 15-year public health study by Harvard professor Felton Earls, who's in that photo right there. And he said that he looked at struggling individuals in neighborhoods across Chicago and asked what made the greatest difference in the health and well-being of these people in these communities. And what he found is something that was more important than wealth, access to healthcare, low crime levels, and any other public health factors. Collective efficacy, the capacity of people to act together on matters of common interest. So over the years, I actually saw something the opposite, and you might have as well too, seeing something very troubling show up in our societies, especially during COVID, this era of cancel culture, that it's so easy to dehumanize and cut people out now. This is creating brittle social capital, and actually what Jonathan Haidt calls structural stupidity, when all ends of the political spectrum attack the moderates who are critical of extreme positions. And he says that when critics go silent and we start shooting the moderates, the group gets stupid. I love this graphic because, I mean, gosh, this so speaks to what I feel online when I go online and I'm just like inundated with the craziness. And, you know, like basically labels dominate our media landscape and everyday conversation. Yet we end up knowing less about each other, but assuming we know more. We're the right ones, they're the bad ones. We're the ones with the truth, they're the ones not with the truth. With everything I've looked at, how can we really know each other? So this is a lot of headlines, but I really want to hone in on the fact that the majority of Americans are self-censoring right now. And not because of our current administration, but really because they're afraid to be canceled or alienated from their community or have their careers threatened. And I personally, working at the high school and when I taught at San Francisco State, saw lawsuits destroy people's lives for no good reason when we could have talked it out. And so this whole climate of fear and pressure has really kept building. And this one on the far right too, Cato Institute poll found that 71% of Americans say political correctness has silenced discussions society needs to have, and 58% have political views that they're afraid to share. And I don't have it here, but there's also a recent study that came out in December 2024 that looked at thousands of people's social media posts and polls, and they found a significant decline in people's motivation to share views that are unique or controversial, something that might make them stand out. And I'm thinking, wow, that is really intense that we're co-creating a culture where we're afraid to say something that might be out of the norm. If our psychology professors, like if the people that we're entrusted to help us make sense of these issues are self-censoring, how much do we really know about what people think? So that's a really important question to hold. In today's culture of fear, what looks like consensus is often just the byproduct of a polarized culture where many people literally feel unsafe to speak their minds. So the crisis we face today in public health isn't just medical or environmental, it's social and moral. So we can't mobilize our social capital in service to public health when human stories of harm are suppressed, dismissed, or censored because of political correctness and culture war issues. That there are people whose lives have been harmed and even destroyed by powerful systems, specifically giant corporations who control our food, our medicine, our agricultural and health systems, and who instrumentalize our government agencies to support policies and products that harm human health and the environment. And we're not able to have these deeper conversations partly because our social capital is really being eroded right now. And so our health epidemics are getting worse, not because we lack solutions, but largely because our attention is constantly being redirected towards fear-based narratives, driving the endless culture wars. So at its core, social capital is defined by one question: who belongs in the circle of human concern? If we extend that only to the people who vote like us or think like us, social capital collapses. So the people who believe in health freedom or informed consent aren't just right-wing talking points, they're people. Same with those injured by transgender medicine and vaccines. But all the people working within the healthcare and the pharmaceutical industry too, they're not just sheeple, they're also people too. So without space for nuance, we risk confusing groupthink with liberation. And we may even mistake slogans repeated in echo chambers for actual genuine conversations. So I'm going to read an excerpt from one of my latest Substack articles because, you know, here we are fighting over labels and identities, and then also we have like all these protests about fight the oligarchs and take the oligarchs down. But isn't it interesting that the real force is harming our human health? Very powerful institutions and people still are going unchallenged, like the titans of our centralized food system. Yet if you scratch beneath the surface, you'll uncover a widespread conspiracy to poison our food, air, and water. And this is something that should be bringing us together, right? I'm going to read you an excerpt to show you how serious this is, especially with the pesticide industry right now. Across the U.S., a powerful legislative push is underway to protect pesticide manufacturers from being held accountable for the harms caused by their products. Agrochemical companies have faced over 177,000 lawsuits in the U.S., linking their products to environmental destruction, cancer, brain diseases, infertility, organ damage, birth defects, and other deadly health problems, making it one of the largest corporate liability issues in modern history. The 1982 neurotoxic contaminant MPT case was a turning point in showing how a single toxin could instantly trigger Parkinson's by destroying a specific part of the brain. Scientists later discovered that paraquat, a widely used U.S. pesticide banned in over 70 countries, attacks the brain in much the same way. As rates of Parkinson's have tragically surged, especially among the farming community, where thousands of farmers are currently suing major agrochemical companies, neurologists now say the disease is largely environmentally caused, driven by long-term exposure to chemicals like paraquat. A 2024 Politico article put it bluntly: Parkinson's is a man-made disease. Some may argue that these new laws only shield pesticide makers when their products comply with EPA standards. But how much does that really mean when EPA has a long and well-documented history of corporate capture, from shielding polluters to facing growing criticism from scientists and whistleblowers who say the agency is failing to protect the public? Why should we trust EPA-approved products when the agency permits tens of millions of pounds of paraquat to be sprayed on our food, yet has banned paraquat on golf courses in 2021 due to serious public health risks? Few people know that some of the chemicals sprayed on our food today were originally developed during World War I and II as nerve agents and poison gases designed to harm and kill humans. Bayer, the company that acquired Monsanto, which produces 40% of the world's glyphosate, grew out of IG Farben, the Nazi-linked chemical giant that helped run the concentration camp at Auschwitz, where nerve gases killed hundreds of thousands of European Jews. Despite undeniable evidence showing that toxic chemicals are impairing our brains, bodies, and our capacity to thrive, these existential warnings continue to be ignored. We're being constantly exposed to thousands of untested ingredients that are banned or regulated in other countries. If this isn't an attack on science, what is? To repair what's broken, we need a deeper ethic, grounded in a mutual commitment to each other's well-being and ability to thrive. A moral and spiritual reality that connects us beyond ideology, beyond tribe, religion, political party, you name it. So the next one is strong institutions. So the first one was social capital. The second one is strong institutions. So President Dwight Eisenhower, many people know that in 1961 he made the speech about the dangers of a military-industrial complex. But in that same speech, he also cautioned Americans about the growing power of what he called a scientific technological elite. He said the prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment project allocations and the power of money is ever present. And so he was warning us because the federal government had become a major financier of scientific research after World War II. And he was worried that the spirit of open inquiry and viewpoint diversity, which underpins the scientific process, would be corrupted by the priorities of the federal bureaucracy. He was really warning that we need to strengthen our institutions against elite and corporate interests. And that even before he said that, that warning reflected a pattern already set in motion decades earlier, because in the early 20th century, powerful private foundations began reshaping science and medicine, which is what I'm about to share right now. So John D. Rockefeller, his fortune came from Standard Oil, and Standard Oil controlled about 90% of U.S.'s oil production and distribution. And he began expanding his business empire into a new frontier: pharmaceuticals made with petrochemicals. Through the Rockefeller Foundation and partnerships with the Carnegie Foundation, he helped finance what was called the 1910 Flexner Report, which radically restructured medical education in the U.S. So Abraham Flexner, interestingly enough, this guy was not a medical doctor. He wasn't a scientist. He was an educational theorist hired by Rockefeller and the Carnegie Foundation to evaluate medical schools. He didn't have a medical degree, he didn't have clinical experience, and no scientific training. So isn't it interesting that RFK Jr. is getting grilled all the time by senators saying, well, you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist. It's like, well, the person that helped shape what modern medicine is today was not any of those either. So, to be serious, though, this report led to the closure of over half of all medical schools in the U.S., specifically naturopathic medicine, nutritional medicine, homeopathic medicine, chiropractic medicine, herbal medicine, and other non-drug approaches. Things that we now call CAM, or complementary and alternative medicine, that was used for thousands of years and then became quackery. All of the research and practice was redirected towards petroleum-based drugs, effectively connecting big pharma to big oil. In fact, the Flexner report deemed any approach to medicine that did not advocate for the use of treatments like vaccines as tantamount to quackery. There's a quote here about chiropractics. They are unconscionable quacks, he says in this quote. These institutions, and Johns Hopkins was one of the first hospitals to implement all this, became the architects of a new medical establishment. In fact, John Rockefeller once said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. So trust the science sounds noble until you realize the extent of the revolving door and corporate influence back channel that undermines the strength of our institutions, and specifically the functions of our regulatory agencies that are supposed to protect us from harm. So I'm going to give some examples of this. So Dr. Herbert Lay Jr. was the head of the FDA in the 60s, and he said what the FDA is doing and what the public thinks it's doing are as different as night and day. He complained further that during his 18-month tenure, he had been under, quote, constant, tremendous, sometimes unmerciful pressure from drug industry officials. And on the right, you see that, we think that FDA is mostly taxpayer funded. It's actually not. It's mostly funded by our pharmaceutical industry. At this point in 2022, 75%. So the next one, and many of you might know this, Dr. Richard Horton, who was the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, which is considered to be one of the most well-respected, peer-reviewed medical journals in the world, once stated that journals have devolved into information laundering operations for the pharmaceutical industry, and that the case against science is straightforward. Much of the scientific literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Science has taken a turn towards darkness. Another one, Marcia Angell, the former editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, another renowned journal. She says, it's simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that's published. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reached slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. All right, here's another big one. Just take a look at some of these headlines. When you really look at the collective conversation, it's like you're either for science or against science. Things are so much more complex than that. One of my favorite headlines is that top right. Goldman Sachs asks in biotech research report, is curing patients a sustainable business model? I know. Another example that's very recent, Vfluence. And this actually came out right around the time with the USAID revelations, where everyone was so angry about USAID being cut, when in fact there were a lot of fraud and corruption and special interests within USAID. So Vfluence was one of them, which was a company funded by USAID and USDA who secretly tracked and profiled over 500 scientists, environmental activists, journalists, and food safety advocates. Many of them were opposing GMOs and pesticides and calling attention to the millions of pounds of chemicals that are sprayed on our food each year across the U.S. Basically, the Vfluence dossiers included private addresses, family details, and derogatory commentary about these people. It even had addresses of where their kids go to school. And so the goal was to threaten and neutralize critics with surveillance and reputational smears. Members of this portal included over 1,000 USDA policymakers, State Department officials, agrochemical executives, and lobbyists, all working to protect corporate agricultural interests. So how do we restore institutional integrity with all of these examples? And we have a database of over 13,000 news articles spanning various high-level government corruption and cover-ups and corporate cover-ups, with science, food, and health being 3 main topics. We've got hundreds of examples of this. How do we restore institutional integrity? So Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the director of the NIH, who co-authored the Great Barrington Declaration that was questioning the efficacy of COVID lockdowns, he shared with the Free Press that the first step to rebuilding institutional integrity is transparency. So he said something that I think should happen right now, which is right now we have the Physician Payment Sunshine Act, which allows anyone to search for and view all pharmaceutical money doctors have received since 2013, and we need the same for our research industry and our science industry. All right, so now it's shared stories. Everyone okay with me? Everyone tracking? I know it's a lot. And this next one is going to be an interesting one too. So shared stories are so important, and I love this graphic. It's like, what holds a diverse democracy together? Like, our country is so diverse, and it's impossible that we would think the same or act the same. And we're storytelling creatures. Like, we like to think that we're navigating the world through data, but we actually navigate as humans through stories. Stories are like the ocean, and we're like fish who swim in it. Stories are who we are, and stories can either unite us or divide us. And they can liberate us or control us. So the real question in today's media environment isn't just what's true. The deeper questions are, who are the architects of our shared stories? Who gets to decide what's real and not real? And what's allowed to be talked about and what's not allowed to be talked about? Once we understand that the entire conversation has been manipulated by powerful interests, and when we see the scale of corruption within our institutions, isn't it natural that mainstream narratives claiming to have the truth should be suspect? So in fact, what we learned, especially through COVID, is that there is a sprawling, sophisticated system of narrative control. This is a quote by George Washington University about propaganda. Propaganda uses lies, misinformation, inflammatory language, and other negative communication to achieve an objective related to a cause, goal, or political agenda. And so we now have hard evidence that propaganda has been institutionalized inside our own information ecosystem. So this is going to be a lot, but feel free to take a picture. And what I love to do is just inundate people with headlines and information, and then you can take your time after. Like, if you ever go on our YouTube channel, some of our videos, I really pile on the news article headlines and images and declassified government documents, but I think it's really important to have this. Even alternative media sometimes, especially alternative social media, they don't offer the right talking points and the right information that could help us start making sense. It's just, they don't want us to know. They don't care about us. It's like, well, let's actually look at the machinery, right? So basically, two of the most revealing disclosures during COVID came from the Cyber Threat Intelligence League whistleblower files and the Twitter files. These were huge revelations, and of course they were covered up. And what it exposed was federal agencies, military intelligence contractors, big tech platforms, and NGOs coordinating to influence and suppress online speech, especially on contentious topics like COVID. But it also went to Russia-Ukraine narratives, it also went to 5G, and it also went to election fraud. And lots of other issues, but those were the biggest ones. You can see on the right, the ones with like all the blacked out. For a long time, when the Twitter files came out, the mainstream media was like, there's no proof that the FBI was involved. But clearly we see with these leaked emails, and there's much more. If you go on our YouTube channel, I have a whole video called Transforming Media Polarization, One Echo Chamber at a Time, where I really go into this, which is to clearly show that the DHS and FBI were totally involved in coordinating and suppressing online speech. And in fact, here, where it says, so this is for people that wanted to share ads on Twitter, and, it's saying, like, you have a right to, if you violate some of our rights agreements or policies, we may stop the ad from running as we determine in our sole discretion. And then internal guidance was any user identified by the U.S. intelligence community as a state-sponsored entity. So it's like, why is our intelligence agency so involved in suppressing our speech? That was a big question I was holding. So the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, that was actually the name that they gave themselves. It was a whole consortium of military intelligence contractors from the US and the UK. A lot of them were volunteers, and they used to work for the CIA, DHS, FBI, that created offensive and defensive tactics to influence speech online. So who was kind of aware of the censorship and the craziness that was happening during COVID and was like, what the heck's happening? Great. So this is a huge part of this. Instead of allowing people to think and debate for themselves, which is what a healthy democracy would do, Seedle and Twitter file operatives pressured social media companies to throttle or ban stories. So some of their tactics involved, and you can't see here, but also if you go online, we have this in a much bigger form, co-opting hashtags, infiltrating private invite-only groups, cutting off bank access to those who organize rallies, and creating, this is the one that gets me, creating sock puppet accounts, which are fake online identities. So it's like, we would think, oh, okay, like the kind of resistance to people questioning the narrative is organic, when in fact it wasn't. They were creating a whole army of fake profiles to manipulate discussions and create the illusion of widespread support or opposition to alternative narratives. All right, we keep going, but this one is kind of after COVID. This started getting revealed in Senate hearings, where basically federal agencies were pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into misinformation research. So AI tools were developed and used to detect and censor so-called malinformation. Has anyone heard of malinformation? Yeah, so that was an interesting term. So basically, malinformation is information that is true, but it's deemed harmful. So that means that you can post something that's completely true, but if it causes people to question government policy, it might still be taken down. And this is actually how our government defines it. So this isn't my spin. In the growing infrastructure of what people now call the censorship industrial complex, taxpayer money funds research that builds tools to limit what taxpayers see and say. We did a news summary that came out in the Senate hearings, that they were creating AI systems that could censor faster than any human can. So, I mean, the high-tech surge of censorship tactics during COVID is really stands us apart from any other time in history, too. So this is the Twitter files. Behind closed doors, Slack messages and emails with Twitter staff actually debated, like, are these posts violating our policy? Is this misinformation? Like, we don't really have solid reasoning for marking that link unsafe. And so this whole idea of like, oh, it was this consensus where Twitter censored people. When you look actually behind closed doors, there was a lot of doubt and people were afraid to speak up. And then, Moderna's surveillance campaign. So Li Fang, he did a whole investigation into Moderna's surveillance campaign, where Moderna was partnering with Public Goods Project to work with the American Board of Internal Medicine to basically create a whole infrastructure within our medical schools to teach people what is called vaccine misinformation. It's called an online course called the Infodemic Training Program. And so basically, it was a network of 45,000 healthcare professionals in partnership with Moderna and the American Board of Internal Medicine that basically gave approved talking points to say, here's what's misinformation and here's what you teach in your medical schools. And then, of course, they had an AI-driven surveillance system powered by Blue Silk AI that was tracking vaccine conversations across 150 million websites in nearly 200 countries and automatically flagged content that, quote, encourages vaccine hesitancy. Whether or not anyone feels any one way of vaccines, like why should pharmaceutical companies be policing online debate? Then there's NewsGuard. Who's heard of NewsGuard? They played a huge role in the censorship machine too. So NewsGuard was a for-profit company that received contracts from the government, including the Pentagon, that scores news websites on trust. So New York Times, 100% A+, and then a lot of independent media platforms were F. So Unheard has done lots of great journalism work. And Unheard did an op-ed for Washington Post, which is what you see on the left, that was stating how government-funded disinformation watchdogs have morphed into tools of censorship, and how they were doing it is that they were using ad blacklists to financially suppress independent media. If NewsGuard deems you as like spreading misinformation, they can cut off your ad revenue. And so this destroyed platforms, including Consortium News, which is founded by a Polk award-winning journalist who has long been an anti-war activist and was questioning the narratives of the Ukraine-Russia war. NewsGuard ended up blocking their ad revenue. And then there's Ground News. Who's heard of Ground News? Okay, yeah, so a lot of people, when they find out my work, they're like, oh, you'd love Ground News. because it's like, hey, read the news from multiple perspectives, see through media bias with reliable news. So on one level, yeah, it is helpful to see what different sides are saying. But the issue is that it's promising to help people fact check stories and spot media bias, as you were saying. But it's doing it by categorizing complex issues into partisan boxes. So it's claiming to help people see every side of a news story, but it's actually directing people away from the content of the news by assigning partisan labels. So I tested this, and now you can unless you have unless you pay. But at one point they were free. And I looked up like vaccine safety, including the FDA analysts writing to the CDC and FDA saying we need some warning labels on the vaccines because there are vaccine injuries. There's lots of cases of myocarditis. That story was labeled right wing. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure I'm not a right-winger. So it's like the categorization. Ground news contributes to the story of division by perpetuating the two-party categorization structure. So we've got covert censorship networks, fact-checking organizations, credibility scoring tools funded by powerful interests, and platforms funneling everything into partisan boxes. And what all of this is doing is directly manipulating and undermining the shared reality we so desperately need. I believe that we are perfectly capable of finding the truth together when special interests stop getting in the way of that process. Before I move on, maybe we can just do a quick stretch break. If anyone wants to stand up and just do a stretch break with me. Yeah, just getting back into our bodies. That was a lot of information. Thank you so much for listening and holding space for this challenging information. I really do believe that when we understand the machinery, we can begin to shift it. So social capital, strong institutions, and shared stories. I came up with 6 media empowerment tools that I believe can strengthen these 3 pillars of a healthy society. So the first one is regulate to de-escalate, especially like what we just did now, getting back into our bodies, getting back into our breath is so important. And with my background in like holistic health studies, stress management, and restorative justice, where I was actively de-escalating very high-intensity conflicts, your own resistance and tension adds to the problem. So as you're navigating the media, just noticing where and why you get defensive. Like our first question when we started is like, what could I have done differently, right? Like when I was in a conflict. So noticing where and why we get defensive or emotionally activated, because the more regulated our nervous system is, the less we're pulled into the divisive emotional narratives and dramas. A lot of this feels very dramatic, you know. Research shows that our heart actually sends more signals to the brain than the brain does to the heart. So if we're really stressed, our heart is in an incoherent rhythm. It's like beating fast, and there's a lot of fear, and that disrupts our ability to think well. It shuts down our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain responsible for logic and empathy and decision making. Countless studies have shown is that even 1 minute of breathing, like inhaling through the nose and then exhaling out of our mouth, can shift our physiology and our general state of being. With all my experience working with people in high-intensity conflicts is that regulating your own nervous system can change the physiology in the room itself, in the space you're in. That each of us can become a regulating presence for each other, where our own energy helps regulate the hijacked nervous system of the collective. And that this has a ripple effect. If you've ever been around someone who can stay calm, you can feel that energy, right? And our mirror neurons are other evidence that we're literally co-regulating off each other all the time. And when we bring this state into our relationships or how we engage with the media, we can become the kind of person whose grounded energy helps others relax and think in new ways and imagine new possibilities. Now, the next one is notice binary thinking. Sometimes we can go into good versus bad, black and white, us versus them, right and wrong. And just the act of noticing that interrupts the thought process. And so how do we release the need to control or judge people for thinking differently? And this is the one that's really important to me, is how do we separate people from their positions? So disagreement isn't always worst case scenario. It's just a disagreement. Being curious doesn't mean you're agreeing either. And so if we can interrupt that pattern, we can shift how we think, and that changes everything. The next one is live the questions. One of my favorite quotes is answers keep us apart and questions bring us together. So instead of fixating on answers or, oh, that's wrong, I don't like that person, why did they say that? Say, notice something you haven't noticed before. Like, let me really listen here. And maybe listen for shared values and common ground. We have a visceral reaction and then we pause and we say, let's get curious. And as I said earlier, something that I've found is that there's always seeds of truth to every perspective. We just have to find it. And the next one is assume bias. So a lot of people think media literacy means getting rid of bias, but it's actually, media literacy says that bias is inevitable because reality is complex and no single narrative can hold it all. And so actually propaganda thrives when only one approved point of view is allowed. So truth can only emerge when there's a good faith representation of all biases and views to bring different pieces of reality together. So I would suggest, given so much of the propaganda out there, is to challenge yourself to read, view, and listen to a diverse range of perspectives. And the next one is be mindful of the overuse of the negativity bias. So we've got this incredible nervous system that alerts us to threats. We evolved to do that because if we didn't, we'd probably be dead already. We need to have fear. We need to be aware of threats. But the issue is that as we've evolved for hundreds of millions of years, we're now overusing our negativity bias, which has led to two fundamental outcomes. We overestimate threats and we underestimate resources. And so media narratives, government, corporate special interests, and even your favorite alternative journalists can use powerful emotions of fear and anger to influence how you think and how you behave. It can fuel division, it can fuel tribal dynamics, and so name-calling, derogatory labels, discrediting, scapegoating, oppositional views. So just be mindful of how this negativity bias can actually be overused. And then lastly, take in the good. So I've once heard that the future belongs to those who give the next generation reason for hope. So just as our negativity bias has helped us to survive, we also need to know what's going right and what's going well in the world because it signals to us that things are okay, we're safe, and that actually neuroscience is showing that when we take in the good, like not just like, oh, that's fun, moving on, oh, bad thing. Like when we really take in the good and we feel it in our bodies, it rewires our brain structure. And another part of taking in the good is find your genius, like find your strengths. What are you good at? Like what brings out the best in you? How can you bring that into the media? How can you bring that into your conversation? Because when you practice your strengths, you can lean on them when things get hard. Like maybe you know that you're not the best at communicating when you're like after work, and you know that that's not your best time. And so just practicing being more mindful. And what my mentor said in my graduate degree program is, when you become aware of your strengths, you can build on them. I would suggest that this is a huge part of media literacy. And so the last thing I'll leave you here with is 3 inspiring solutions for a healthier society and future. I actually was going to do 10, and then I was like, I don't think I'm going to make it timing-wise. And so if you go to our database or go to our website, we have thousands of examples, 18 subcategories of inspiring news articles from healing our bodies, reforming our medical system, our criminal justice system, healing our earth. Like we've got all these incredible documentation of solutions that are already out there. As a media activist, I've noticed is the positive and the solutions are heavily underreported. And I think that's part of the propaganda machine, is to inundate us with doom and gloom narratives. So the first one is the power of the organic food movement. So what I love about this is that there are literal whole countries and cities that are going organic. Like in Quebec, Canada, they've gone organic. Chemicals on corn and soy dropped by 95%, yet their crop yields remained unaffected. And then Sikkim in India went 100% organic, and it took many, many years, right? They officially went organic in 2016. But basically, their crop yields also increased, and they're having a whole infrastructure of teaching children how to farm, how to preserve traditional knowledge without chemical farming. And then Paris, France, they were actually paying farmers to go organic. They needed to clean up the waterways, and what they were finding is that the pesticides were destroying the water systems. And the next one is the power of mushrooms. There's all these news articles coming out about how mushrooms are being used to break down pesticides and herbicides. They're being used to break down plastic, and they're actually being used in highly contaminated zones to reduce radiation levels. And they've been known to very effectively remove heavy metals from industrial sites. I've got a study here. Oyster mushrooms, we just summarized a news article here. Oyster mushrooms can break down petroleum and hydrocarbons, putting them on the top of the list when it comes to cleaning up deadly oil spills. A 2023 study conducted in Massachusetts found that there could be benefits to integrating mycelium into the state's pre-existing stormwater management infrastructure to serve as a filtration system to improve water quality. And so there's actually all types of other bioorganisms that are being used that it's actually incredible. And it could be scaled, right? We just got to get those economic incentives in play, but it's there's a lot of potential here. And the last one, this is one of my favorites, which is the social and green prescribing movement. Many doctors don't know they have a legal right to prescribe social and green prescriptions. It's very common in Canada and Portugal. And so basically, it's an alternative healthcare approach that recognizes that purpose, creativity, social connection, nature is just as important as pharmaceutical meds. So instead of offering pills and saying what's wrong with you, care providers ask what matters to you. And literally doctors can prescribe vouchers to the farmer's market, cooking classes, buddy activities, music, nature walks, meaningful work in the community. There's all these public health studies showing how transformative this is in reducing chronic pain, improving mental health, improving quality of life, which unfortunately our current medical system doesn't really focus on, and reducing or preventing the need for medication. And I love this graphic. It may be hard to see from here, but this is kind of like a visual map of social prescribing. It's like over 20 countries are adopting social prescribing. These questions are at the core of what doctors ask their patients. Do you feel connected to your community? What groups are you a part of? What's missing in your community? What skills do you have? And would you be willing to share your gifts with others? Based on what they say, here's like a senior travel group. Or there was this one example of an older man who had tons of like unidentifiable chronic pain. They couldn't really identify where it was coming from, and he was very depressed. He had just lost his wife. And so the doctor prescribed him to do a fishing trip with another man that was a patient of his. And they got together and fished together and became like really good friends. He was one of many case study examples where his chronic pain decreased immensely. So what I love about this is that it's also redefining what health really means. Through my background in holistic health studies, there's no doubt that allopathic biomedical medicine has saved lives. But real health is more than just the absence of disease. And it's more than just treating symptoms in isolation without addressing root causes. How do we return to a model of health that can truly address whole person health? Physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and very importantly, economic, which is something that I don't have time to get into here, but that's also a very important piece of here. So I want to end this whole thing with this incredible quote by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen. So she's one of the early pioneers of integrative medicine and whole person medicine. And she spent 4 decades working with people who face serious illness, cancer, and her teaching programs are really on the human dimensions of medicine that have really been lost. Now her programs are taught in more than half of U.S. medical schools and in 7 countries around the world. And over the years, she's really called attention to the idea that doctors have been trained to help their patients through a curing, fixing relationship based on static reductionist models of the human body and spirit. And so she says here that because the medical system does not yet understand the full range of human needs, it wounds people, both doctors and patients. It doesn't recognize the full range of human strengths either. What is needed for the healing of our medical system is what is needed for the healing of our culture. Medical training at the moment is like a disease, and we have to recover from it. I am a recovering physician. Medicine and healing is as close to love as it is to science. There's no question that we live better through science and what we can measure. Yet to live well is going to take something more than that. Life is filled with mystery, miracles, courage, heroism, love, all these things that we can witness but we can't fully measure or even understand. But we know they make our lives valuable anyways. Today's polarizing social environment has numbed us to the sound of the genuine in ourselves and in other people. And it serves the interests of the global elite and all the corporate players who benefit from keeping us separate and seemingly unable to work through our differences. Yet I believe that human unity and common ground are the only real paths to freedom. When we can recognize what's really pushing us in our personal lives and as a society, we already have a degree of freedom from it just by our awareness. That's powerful. And freeing ourselves from harmful systems starts from within. And what we do to heal our bodies and minds from toxic chemicals, toxic beliefs, and toxic ways of relating to each other. And it deepens as we harmonize our choices with the natural world. Challenging information like all of this can paradoxically remind us of the greater good. It's the courage of the people and the love for the common good that bring these injustices to light, fueling open dialogue and constructive action. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in to what feels like a total adventure through the darkness and hopefully into the light. I wanted to end on an inspiring note because there are so many amazing things, and I've come to believe with everything I've looked at that we have all the solutions we need to change things right now. And it starts with us. It It starts with our beliefs and our thoughts and how we relate to ourselves in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.